So, my presentation today is called Still Serving the Ploughboy, William Tyndale's lasting contribution to 19th century British city missions, and I might say even to today. So, to remind those of you who know this already and to introduce those who may be new to this particular reference to the Ploughboy, I want to remind you that after Tyndale's university training, this is the background to the quote. Tyndale was ordained priest and chaplain in Frampton upon Severn for 2 years. So he'd been to Oxford, he'd been to Cambridge, now he's a tutor and a priest for the children of Sir John and Lady Walsh at Little Sodbury Manor in Gloucestershire. And he was a frequent guest at their gatherings. And I imagine him at a large wooden table surrounded by very intelligent and prominent people, among whom was a learned Catholic cleric who happened to say, "We were better without God's laws than the Pope's." To which Tyndale famously replied, "I defy the Pope and all his laws, and if God spare my life ere many years, I will cause a boy that drives the plow to know more of Scripture than thou dost." And in so speaking, he was now a bit dangerous. So, dangerous but committed to his calling. So, just to remind us of some details, by 1525, he had the printing of the first translation of the New Testament in Cologne, which of course was raided, and he fled with William Roy, his associate, to Worms, where he continued the work and produced over 3,000 copies, which were then smuggled to England and Scotland. And of course, and now about a year later, the printing continued in the octavo format, which is smaller than the original printing, which was very significant because it was easier to smuggle and easier to carry in one's back pocket. Now, of course, the material is contraband and in great demand, which angered the Bishop of London, who proceeded to authorize the burning of Tyndale's Bibles. And then in 1530, 5 books of the Old Testament were published. And in 1534, the revised or second version of his New Testament was printed. So Tyndale continued and succeeded in his plan. Now, I'm not going to go into this background here, but I do want to say that after he published the practice of prelates, King Henry VIII was particularly angry and wanted him back in England. So he requested that he come back, and there's a story about his return. But Tyndale's response to this request, inasmuch as he honored the king, was that he would if the Bibles were allowed to be printed in England. But of course, that wasn't suitable to the king, and he didn't return. But the result was 12 years in exile from England and 18 months in prison once he was, betrayed and before he was executed, a high price to pay for his life's calling. And his last prayer on the scaffold was, "Open the King of England's eyes." And the answer came within 3 years when the Great Bible was legalized for publication and distributed to every parish church in England. So we have his legacy, which is far, far, far too significant for me to even attempt to go into, but I'll just highlight the fact that he endorsed and synthesized the vernacular, which had been attempted periodically throughout English history, because England, as you know, is a great conglomerate of different ethnic and groups whose language was quite vast, but he was one of those who brought it together and helped to standardize, which didn't, of course, really happen until Samuel Johnson, but anyway, and his ongoing influence in the modern English language. So here we have, you'll recognize these phrases: eat, drink, and be merry, the salt of the earth, the powers that be, broken-hearted, twinkling of the eye, and so many more, which we might see as we go along. But the one I particularly like is from Genesis 3, when the woman says to the serpent, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said, you must not eat of the fruit from the tree in the middle of the garden. You must not touch it or you will die." And the answer was, "Tush, you will certainly not die," the serpent replied. I like that because that's a good illustration of how he tried to incorporate the vernacular of the day. And more than 80% of the King James Bible of the New Testament is based on Tyndale's translation, and that percentage goes up and down depending on who you read. Okay, so my research began with a question, which all good research does, and that is, what does a real scholar do? And real scholars sort of go around exploring and seeking things out. And my answer to that question immediately became, well, you look for hidden treasures in archives, or you
Mhm.
find revealing letters that shed new light on long debated questions, or you find undiscovered manuscripts. And for me, my search began in July 2019 in a small renovated fisherman's cottage in Kingsdown, Kent, where everything stops for tea. Now, and I just want to give you a word of personal background. My mother is English. My relatives are spread all over Great Britain and now Malta. And I went with my mother to meet them all and enjoy their company. But at a certain point, I was a bit fed up and I thought, I'm tired of tea. What does a real scholar do? And so my answer was to get in that car and to drive to Canterbury, which is where I ended up doing research in the summer of 2019. And I went to the archives in the Canterbury Cathedral, which required an introduction from the dean, verification of my faculty status, a trip through the inner courtyard, upstairs to this lovely room where everyone wore white gloves and was very careful to use pencils and so forth, and to look through their materials. Now, at the time that I started this, nothing was digitized. It was all in card catalog. And whenever I look in a card catalog, I start with the word mission because the word mission really appeals to me. And so what happened was, lo and behold, I found an entry in the card catalog, which was U186/1, the City Mission Report. It's a Canterbury City Mission Report for 2 years, handwritten document by a city missioner. And I was able, before I left, to get a photocopy of it, which I think was a remarkable achievement. I don't think it would happen again today, but it happened, and I've spent a great deal of time transcribing this material. So I'm going to tell you about this city missionary, how he came to be, and how it links to the contribution of Tyndale's work. So here we have the mission report. What is it? It's a 3-year daily log of George Campine's visit to the people of Canterbury, including location, conversations, and the results. After each month, he summarizes the visits he's made. He tabulates them. He was meticulous about his documentation. And why is this document significant? Well, let me tell you that Donald M. Lewis is a fabulous scholar, he's not with us any longer, but he has done extensive research in this area of city missions. And in his book from 2001, which is all about the London City Mission, he wrote this: only one of the city mission agents' journals seems to have survived from the 19th century. And I have to say to him, when I read that, I couldn't believe it because guess what? There is another one. It's from Canterbury, and there is yet another one. It's from Plymouth because I was in Plymouth at a conference when they found it and they cataloged it. But but this one is particularly important. The City Mission Journal that Lewis wrote about and based his observations on was by a Jewish convert working in London. But this report brings us into the center of the established church in England and has unique contributions. Well, what can we say about it? Well, it lasted for 35 years. It was non-sectarian. It was supported by donations, subscriptions, pledges from individuals, very broadly based. It was respected by the city authorities who cooperated with the city missioner in addressing all the needs of the city. It had a very clear goal to spread the glad tidings of the gospel to those poor creatures who live in our courts and alleys and who had never been inside a church. And that's basically what it is. It's a parachurch organization. And the method was to visit from house to house among the poor for the purpose of making them acquainted with the way of salvation through Christ, to read, when practicable, a portion of God's word in every house, to bring sinners to Christ, and to induce them to take his word as their guide. There are three key figures in the city mission movement that to which I'd like to bring your attention, without whom this kind of movement these figures are in the trajectory of the development of the city mission movement. And the first is Thomas Chalmers, one of my favorite Scots. He's been called Scotland's greatest 19th century churchman. Some thought him a madman. He was an academic. Next one is David Naismith, the father of city missions, and our guy today, George Campen, the city missionary, about whom I will be speaking in detail. Now, Chalmers. Chalmers was a mathematician, an economist, an academic, a theologian, and a pastor. He's the one who came up with the term the godly commonwealth. In 1811, he had read Wilberforce's practical view of prevailing religious system of professed Christians, which was a critique of religion at the time, Christianity, and how it was being developed, and also his own experience. And he also had a health crisis. He had three family members afflicted with TB, and he almost fell prey to it himself. But he had a conversion experience, and which really changed his heart and gave him a more sympathetic relationship with his parishioners. In 1815, he was called to this St. Glasgow's very famous St. George's on the Tron Church. Some of you may know Sinclair Ferguson was also at that church. So every time I hear it, I think of this long trajectory of very, very prominent preachers. Well, but when he took it and arrived in Glasgow, his journals record his reaction to his parish. He was overcome by the urban conditions. So greatly did it cause a depression that he thought, I perhaps might have to quit or find a solution. Well, Thomas Chalmers was a very energetic guy, and I think I mentioned some called him mad. He wasn't mad, he was brilliant. He was absolutely brilliant. So he developed a new approach to ministry, which included door-to-door visitation and church-supported poor relief, independent of state involvement. So now we have a very good separation of church and state. The reason for that is because it took too long for the money to get to them. Does that sound familiar? Anyway, so what he did was he enlarged the number of deacons and elders, and he included lay people and sent out visiting teams who developed relationships with parishioners. They had very specific jobs to do. They had to find out what they needed and ascertain some of their life conditions. They started Sabbath and day schools. They distributed tracts. They encouraged Bible reading, and they counseled godly living according to biblical principles. And you can imagine what that was. And that's a very long discussion about his work, which I'm not going to go into. But he succeeded in Glasgow in reducing the number of people on the rolls of the parish that he was overseeing. So statistically, he did a great job. So great that he said, I'm just going to repeat this experiment in the West Ports of Edinburgh, which he did. And that was such a success that the next thing you know, and you can imagine, I'm conflating a lot of history here, he was called before Parliament to tell about his work. And he did, and on the way back, he died. But and in this very innovative approach, apparently, he precipitated the disruption which led to the Free Church. But I would like to say that he inaugurated a new era of urban ministry. So there's many reasons for which Chalmers claims fame. And I want to throw in that he was also, did I say he was an economist? But he became more than economist because he saw that economics did not do the trick. So Naismith was a young man who grew up in the shadow of Chalmers. He too was deeply troubled by physical and spiritual poverty and was very busy doing something about it. So he distributed Bibles as a teenager, door-to-door evangelism. He organized tract societies, that, all these Victorian societies, to provide refuges for fallen women, refuges for fallen women. He founded the Glasgow Young Men's Society for Religious Improvement and the Glasgow City Mission in 1826. And if you look at their website, they will tell you that they are the world's first city mission, which is quite a claim to fame. He also is responsible for starting the London City Mission, and that is one of perhaps the most famous and most active of all. I commend it to your attention. But he, in his, biographies, he's known for starting city missions throughout Great Britain, Western Europe, the United States, and Canada. And that's down the road for me as I pursue this topic. So what he did, though, was he added to Chalmers' work, the vision, the idea of paying full-time laymen as missionaries to supplement the work of the elders and deacons. So now we have a full-fledged parachurch organization. So, and this is how Naismith did it. He only lasted till he burned out. He literally burned out. He went full steam but he was successful. So he identified the city that he wanted to go to. He shared his vision with the people, the leaders, concerned citizens. He established the financial base with their help by donations and subscriptions, identified a board, they hired a missionary, and they followed Chalmers' blueprint of partnering with government officials. So, and then he moved on. So it was quite a life. So now we get to Campen, and I want to say a word about who this man was. First of all, he came from a place called Oddington. I haven't been there, so I don't know a thing about Oddington. And if you do, I hope you tell me later. He was 45 years old when he came to Canterbury with his wife, Anne. He was formerly a Sunday school teacher in a Baptist church in Stow-on-the-Wold. And he was described by the Kentish Gazette as a man so well known throughout the city, and the object he has in view is so thoroughly understood that they cannot but respect him, even though they may be indifferent or even opposed to his message. They know that his object is a good one and that he has their welfare at heart. And this knowledge frequently opens a door which otherwise would be closed against him. So Campen had a very good reputation. Now, we know some about him. He is in the census of 1901, so he was 86 years old at the time. He lived on St. Vernon Road, I think that's the name of it. But that's just to document the fact that we're not talking about a nice story. We're talking about a real person who did a real job. And where did Campen go in the city? Well, his home is documented as 2 Vernon Place, which is outside the city walls. And this is a map from 1843. But so even though it was slightly outside the walls, he went throughout the city. He went to the slums and he went to the surrounding areas, which included the railroad. They were building railroads, the navvies. So he ministered to the navvies. He ministered to people in the hop fields, day laborers of all sorts, agricultural laborers. He was active in the fairs and all. So just a few little images that I found scrounging around the archives. Here's a picture of High Street. It's a main drag through Canterbury, very active, very busy. And this is North Street, which is on the north side, more agricultural, obviously not as developed. We have this marvelous picture here, which I just discovered today. I think that's the Queen coming through. Canterbury, was well known for its parades, and I think that's probably Victoria. But there are also some soldiers over here, and there's all sorts of people. So he was in a very, very active, busy town. And even though it was full of activity, it still had a large urban population that was devastatingly under-resourced. And you'll see from the journal that that is the case. And I like this picture on the right because you see the church in the background and you see the agricultural realities in the surrounding areas. So that's all part of the picture. So his ministry was effective, and these are my conclusions based on my reading of his document, that he worked successfully, and you'll see this, and I have about 4 entries that I want to share with you. He worked in cooperation with city officials. He raised the funds independently from the mission, so he was proactive in that respect. He was meticulous in documenting the number and nature of his visits. He stayed in one place long enough to build relationships with the people to whom he ministered. So you will see in some of these entries that people say, well, I'm so glad you came back. This is what's going on with my daughter, or my husband's, doing a better job, and so forth. He had a reputation for gentleness, even though his words were un, garnished, a very clear message. He was motivated by his concern for the eternal destiny of men and women and did not shrink from discussing spiritual truths. And he included regular cottage meetings to migrant field and railroad workers as an extension of his home-to-home visitations. So he had small group meetings. And I'd like to know more about these cottage meetings, but I understand them to be not one-on-one, in other words, gatherings, larger gatherings. And so now I'd like to share with you some of the entries that validate these ideas that I've been sharing. This one, and the titles for them, I put some titles of my own here. So I'm going to read this. I hope you can see it. When visiting in this place on the 3rd, I heard a great noise and quarreling and fighting in a house where some of those pikeys and gypsies lived. One woman was knocked into the yard, and a great many people were collecting round the door. I went into the house. Each of them had a stick as thick as a man's wrist and about 2 feet long, such as they use at fairs to throw at cocoa nuts or snuff boxes. They were fighting with those, and the crockery was flying about the room. As soon as I got them quiet, I began to talk very serious to them and showed them the evil of using such bad language and called their attention to several passages in God's word. Before I left, they were quite reconciled. Thought that was kind of a nice picture of, it's a very visual. His writing is very visual. You kind of see these things happening. This one is a longer entry, but I want to read it to you because I think it's important that we appreciate Campin's style. It's very colloquial. We don't see a lot of punctuation. I've added that, and that's one of the struggles I'm having actually in putting this out in the public because it needs some punctuation for us to get it. But his writing has style, as you will see in this entry. I have long visited and still visit a poor working family. My visits have always been most gladly received, and I trust have been a means of spiritual good. The last few months, this family have been plunged into the greatest poverty through affliction. First, the husband was seized with ague. Then the wife fell with fever. She lay several days in an unconscious state, not like one dead. She has no bed but the bare sacking to lie upon, no pillow for her head but a bundle of rags, no blanket or sheet, only an old sack cut open to cover her, no night dress of anything of the sort. The poor woman is the most pitiable object I ever saw. She has lost all her hair, likewise the use of one arm. She has no underclothing, no shoes or stockings. She has on only a tattered old dress, and the sack serves her as a covering at night, and she has a shawl by day. I reported her case to the Poor Relief office in Guildhall Street, and when the officer went down to look into the case, he took with him another man. They both of them cried like children and said that they could never have believed there could have been such a case if they had not gone and seen it themselves. They were supplied with a bed and bedding and other things the same day. Now, I really appreciate that because it wouldn't have happened without a guy who was willing to go into the byways in the way he did. There were at least three entities that he collaborated with on the policemen, and there were two others. Okay, so now I also want to read this one. One of the characteristics of Campin's work is that he felt he had to warn people. He had to warn them that Sabbath attendance was important. Working on the Sabbath was a big issue back then. And ideas here. This man has recently died and been professed to be an infidel. He was faithfully warned. The following statements respecting his end were given to me by one who was with him. She said, I have seen pictures of the devil and what are called his imps, but they were nothing compared to his looks. It was awful. She said that a little time before he died, he said, is there any chance for me to be saved? Is there any chance for me to be saved? Those were his last words, and he died as soon as he had spoken them. Now, she talks about imps, but I want you to know that the spiritual realities of 19th century Canterbury were very vivid. There is one entry that has a man talking about imps at the bottom of his bed. I mean, they see visions. They're very, very vivid and serious. So these people were concerned about their spiritual welfare. Now, this one I would like to read to you because it shows the humor of the common man. It also picks up my theme of tea. So here he's saying again that he's warning someone. It would take up too much time to repeat all that was said, but one thing I can say, he was faithfully warned. So this guy is really a piece of work. Here we go. First, he said that my tracts were always began with something and always ended in the same old way, in the old way about God and the Bible and heaven, and he did not believe in anything of the sort, for the Bible was full of contradictions. He said there could not be an almighty God. If there was, after he made man, he would have kept him from doing wrong, and there must be a counteracting power greater than his. He said again, you seem to make yourself as much acquainted with God's will as though you had been and taken a cup of tea with him and had a comfortable chat together. He then spoke of David and said that he was called a man of God, but he was a greater rascal than Greenacre or any of those who were hung at Highgate. And if Christ came of the house of David, he had not much to boast of in his ancestry. So there's a lot of humor there. I really like that one. And then finally, the last one I want to share with you is evidence of the fact that Campion's work bore fruit, and it bore fruit not only in those to whom he spoke, but for those next generation that came after. So the generational theme comes up a lot in this too. So the first case, and this was at the fair, so he starts off this entry by saying he couldn't do much because he got sick the first day. But then he got back together. And so when he started going again, he says, the first case at the fair that I thought worthy of notice was a man and woman who kept a gingerbread stall. After giving them a tract, the woman said, do you remember, sir, giving my little girl a book last year? I told her that I did remember it. And she said, I assure you it's very much prized. She kept it in her box wrapped up in lavender, but is often brought out and read, and she knows most of it by the root of heart. She said, after we went home from the fair last year, my husband and me liked it so much that my husband sent to the stationers and got a quantity of them to give away. I think that he has sent as many as 50 of them away in letters to people in different parts of the country. And we believe that they've been the means of doing good, especially in the case of one man who is a desperate character. Now, by the way, all that spelling is the way he spells. They're not my errors. They're just right out of the period. And I did leave out the fact that the daughter shared the material as well. And the last line here, the book I gave the girl was the old story. And that reminded me, tell me the old story, of Jesus and his love. But that's a title of a track. So I would like to just extend the vision as I bring this talk to a close. I'd like to extend it by quoting from Spurgeon, who was called the Prince of Preachers, from the era that we are concerned about. And so he says, the quote is, we live unto the Lord's, from Romans, and he asked the question, why are we still here if we could just as easily have been gone before we even made it out of the cradle? So this is his answer. Why then are we here? We remain on earth as sowers to scatter good seed, as plowmen, there's that plowman reference, to break up the fallow ground, as heralds publishing salvation. We are here as the salt of the earth, to be a blessing to the world, let us see that our life answers its end. So now we have the plowman, not just the guy in the field working to whom Tyndale was ministering, but we have the plowman who is sowing the seed of the word. Oh, I went too quickly to that. It's a bit of a shock, I'm sure you'll to see this. But I wanted to share with you that the model that Campen illustrates is a model that can be applied in any era. The city mission model is timeless. And the proof of this is that during my sabbatical, I went to Fort Wayne, Indiana, I, and ran a program for outreach youth and ended up developing a program for ministry to urban women. And you see a picture of me here with a woman. Our program is called Women with Vision, and our city missionary is Olive Carpenter, and her hero is Sir Winston Churchill. And she's very committed to this program. And what we do is partner women for personal, professional, and spiritual growth. And we have mentoring, visitation. We meet practical needs with the cooperation of the community. And I'll have you know that the mayor declared November 17th as Women with Vision Day in Fort Wayne, which is wonderful illustration that when good deeds are done, they are endorsed by the powers that be. And this happens even in India, where there's great oppression, as you know, for Christians. But when they go in and do the work, they often are endorsed. So in conclusion, and this is my conclusion to this presentation, Tyndale's vision for making the scriptures available to the common man was and still is extended through the seed sower of the Word of God, eternally living and active, reaching the plowboy and girl, man and woman, at home, at school, and abroad. And that is my presentation for today. I hope you've enjoyed it.